Good day, this is Agenda sitting in for Sita Beltran. I'm Roby Alampay and we are One News. Joining us via Signal TV channels 8 and 250 or online via Facebook, YouTube, or the Signal Play app. Now let's start off by taking a look at the front page of the Philippine Star. The World Health Organization is warning that the Philippines can see a major spike in COVID-19 cases if quarantine protocols are relaxed. Meanwhile, a majority of mayors in Metro Manila have voted closely to shift to the more lenient modified general community quarantine by March. In other words, by next week. In vaccine news, 117,000 doses of Pfizer's COVID vaccines may finally arrive in the country next month. That is still according to the WHO. And still on COVID, President Duterte has certified as urgent 2 vaccine indemnity measures at the House and Senate. And the Education Department is studying proposals to extend school year by 2 weeks, which will lead to a shorter summer break. For more news, stay tuned here on One News. In the meantime, let's proceed to our first interview of the day. We have with us Andy Masigan on the live stream. He is an economist, a columnist of BusinessWorld and the Philippine Star, a good friend of One News, of Cito and myself. Good morning, Andrew.
Thank you, Robbie, for having me on the show. Pleasure to be here.
We both blame Cito for this early morning for both of us. But always a privilege to sit in for Cito. So good morning.
Time.
No, wait, Andy, I was just, they asked me, who do you want to guest? I become bring in Andy Masigan. I haven't spoken with him in quite a while. But I know Andy. I wanted to bring you in because, as we said, you're a businessman. You're also an economist, and I know that among other things, this has been a rough year, of course, for you as for everybody else. But the latest news I know about you is you just opened up a new restaurant again. I mean, I can hear Cito's voice here. I'll try to channel Cito. Andy, what the hell are you thinking?
No. It's like this, Robbie. As you know, apart from my life as an economist, I have to. My livelihood is that I own a food group, which is a restaurant group, no, and we have about 27 restaurants under our umbrella. See, the thing about the pandemic is that we all had to pivot. This restaurant that I opened a couple of weeks ago, okay, was an old restaurant. Okay, but this old restaurant used to cater to the call center, working employees, kind of middle market, and that market is virtually gone. As a matter of fact, I spoke to my landlord and the building owner. Told me that he admitted that their occupancy is down to 30%. Can you imagine? 30%. So just had to pivot to survive. So this restaurant, the one you've heard of, it's called Ted, by the way, the European diner. It's become a Mediterranean lifestyle restaurant and also a bar, which has its own market, and not dependent on the working employees having lunch there every day. So back to my point, survival is really all about being agile and being able to pivot.
Yeah, but Andy, okay, so how has it been doing? It's one thing kasi to hear people say, I'm impatient to reopen, diba? Reopen. I'm impatient to restart. But this is notwithstanding the fact that this was an old restaurant, it is a launch of essentially a new establishment. I mean, what are the calculations there? I mean, because like I said, it was a rough year for you. What's the calculation in terms of when you look at policies of government, when you look at our employees back, when you look at foot traffic, what are all the things that you have to factor in?
Well, I think the best matrix to look at is mobility. Okay,
Mm,
because mobility means people going out, people consuming, going back to the malls, going back to restaurants, etc. So mobility is a good point of reference to start,
mm,
not to get the general picture. And we're now at about 58% as far as mobility is concerned, compared to pre-COVID times.
mm,
Look, Robbie, 58 is just a little bit higher than half, no? So no
mm,
matter what they say that the economy is slowly opening up, the numbers
mm.
prove that we're still quite a distance away.
Yeah.
58% is, yeah, it's, and that's validated by the numbers. You know,
Mm,
as you know, Robbie, I'm a part of this group called Entrepreneurs Organization, and
yeah.
then we're all entrepreneurs now, and we
Mm,
compare our numbers. Okay,
mm,
and the 58% mobility, that's a Google matrix, by the way. So the
mm.
58% mobility factor is validated by our pre-COVID sales.
Okay.
So some establishments, some food chains are experiencing sales as low as 35% of pre-COVID. Others
Yeah.
are as high as 75, but no one higher than 75.
Okay.
That would be the so they said that 2021 was going to be a better year. It's proving to be pretty much the same as the second semester of 2020.
Okay, but the second semester was not the worst of 2020. That was still, di ba, it was the start of it
It
was
was
the start
yeah,
of the lockdown. So
yeah,
we were at the top of the roller coaster, getting ready for a nosedive, nung 2020.
yeah.
So it's
That
still
was
you would assume, you would think, di ba, na sana
hmm.
naman, or you would think that that this would be better than the second
Yeah.
semester.
Well, you know what? I'll tell you what happened. Okay, there's no official statistics
Mm,
as to how many MSMEs have closed so
mm,
far, or at least if there is, the government's being quiet about it. But there
yeah.
was a recent UN study published last October as
Mm,
to which measured how many among Philippine MSMEs have experienced shortage in working capital. As you
yeah.
know, Rob, that's a telltale sign na. If your
Mm,
working capital is short, you're one step away from closure. Okay,
yeah.
and we were close to 30% as of October. So
Mm,
I think that the rate of closure among MSMEs is between that, no, 25 to 30%. And that's alarming because 99.6 of our all enterprises in the Philippines are MSMEs.
mm-hmm.
Diba?
Yeah. You, as you said, you're an economist, you're a businessman. You don't, the two sides of you don't always, you would think, would not always agree on the same things. It's almost like the devil and the angel
Yeah.
on either side of your shoulders.
Mm.
So when they announced, as they announced this week, that
Mm.
NET has recommended, look, let's go back to MGCQ nationwide. Is it the businessman who says yes? Finally, okay. Let's try to see how far we can push this, how far we can be more aggressive, or is it what does the economist on the
Yeah.
other side
Yeah.
tell you?
On both sides, I agree. On because
Mm,
again, to I think this is long overdue. As a matter of fact, I think our numbers are low enough
mm,
to be able to absorb an MS. Oh, with this picture is with my friends from the Spanish embassy. Anyway,
mm,
what do you call this? Our numbers are low enough to be able to accommodate an MGCQ, and
mm,
what's killing a lot of the businesses, okay, especially retail. Let's talk about retail because the majority of our MSMEs
mm.
are involved in retail. Is the inability of the 18 years old and lower
Yeah,
to consume, to go out to malls and consume. That chunk of demographics is a good third of our one third of our market
yeah. But
because
are we? Yeah, but Andy, are we really necessarily saying, hindi, lower natin yung age? No, let's get more young people out there. I mean, not to be, ano, but on the other side of it, and they admit, other people, we don't necessarily have establishments. Everybody agrees this is a matter of of saving lives and livelihood.
Correct.
Um, but is that necessarily what you're saying? Because when you say our numbers are low enough to
Mm,
accommodate,
mm,
I we're also saying, yeah, but that means that we have some headroom to get a little bit to accommodate more people who will get sick, will be inevitable, which will
yeah.
be inevitable.
Mm.
I mean, how exactly do we frame that?
It's a devil in the deep blue sea kind of situation because, as you said,
Mm,
lives and livelihood. But this I'd like to say, um, there was a study conducted uh, that there was actually a graph, no, of what recreational activities are in the lowest to highest risk in terms of COVID exposure. Okay,
mm,
and commercial centers are in the middle range. Okay,
mm,
are in the middle range. They're like sports, playing sports activities. What
mm,
are you should watch out for are entertainment, or if you're in enclosed theater. Okay,
mm.
sports activities when you're in a stadium
Okay.
environment, or anything that you're in a very dense kind of environment. But believe
Mm,
me, Rob, the malls are the farthest thing from dense nowadays. You can
mm.
replicate inside if you like. No, really,
Oh.
there's very, very little traffic. And um, as a matter of fact, I spoke to the three leading malls now, Robinsons, Ayala,
Mm,
and SM are friends of mine. And even they admit that their anchor malls are doing at most 50%, 60%
yeah.
now. Uh, uh,
Mm,
but the provincial or the secondary malls are really about 20% in volume. So pwede pa.
mm.
Mm,
Okay. But um, what's so when they say, for example, oh, let's reopen
mm,
cinemas,
mm.
and
That
you're
I
an
don't agree.
entrepreneur on the, di ba?
That I
No,
don't agree. Mm.
ah, that part you don't agree, because I was
I
gonna say
don't
you
agree.
are an entrepreneur. Okay,
Yeah.
so what's the difference? What's the difference? I mean,
Mm. Well, cinemas, as you know, is a very intimate environment, so to speak, no?
yeah,
And what do you
it's
call this?
it's both it's both it is both mass and it is intimate. You get you get
Intimate.
the two risk
Yeah,
factor, di ba?
correct,
Ah.
correct. And they they have to fix the air conditioning facilities so they realize negative pressure. Otherwise, we
Mm,
breathe the same air. Everybody breathes
mm,
the same air. Kaya there's a lot of retrofitting involved
mm.
in opening cinemas, which is not necessarily true for a mall environment because of the high ceilings.
Uh-huh, uh-huh, uh-huh.
And as long as you're not 100, 100%, our malls are massive, no? So,
Yeah. Well,
so,
some malls, our malls are in Metro Manila, to be fair. There are
hmm,
commercial centers,
hmm,
especially not necessarily in Metro Manila. Let's call them lower end commercial centers that are,
yeah.
not high sailing, that can actually
But
be
you know
closed.
what, Rob? I
Yeah.
have to say though that and siguro kudos na rin to the local LGUs in the provinces because I have outlets in the provinces as well. They're very strict. As a matter of fact, Metro Manila malls are more lenient than they are outside. As in,
Mm, mm,
as in our volume there is about 15%, 20%.
mm.
So
Okay.
what I'm saying is a calibrated opening will not. There are more benefits to realize from a calibrated opening.
Okay. Okay. Now, I want to, and we'll need to get into a gap
Sure.
in a bit, but one question before, can't we wait? I mean, because that's one thing that people are saying, and later on we'll have another guest
Mm, mm,
and we'll have this conversation. But why can't we just wait? I mean, ayan na yung vaccines eh. Parating na yung
yeah.
vaccines, di ba?
Well,
At the same time, there is a factor. There is something that threw a spanner into all of this that really changed. B117 UK variant. We didn't have that in August
correct.
and June. We were having the isn't that also lingering in your minds? And finally, that point of why don't we just wait? Parating na yung vaccines. Let's at least get our frontliners vaccinated. We're not going to get herd immunity in 1 month. So we're not saying wait for a full year until we're all inoculated. Why not just wait at least for the frontline health workers to be vaccinated?
Mm. Uh, to answer that, Rob, not all companies are on equal footing. Some have
Mm,
runways that have already run out, cash runways. I mean, so
mm,
their working capital, as you know, we've all been, or a lot of us have been operating on a deficit. Um, so that means our retained earnings or whatever cash we have has been being dispensed every month to cover payroll and whatnot.
mm,
Uh, some have the runway, some don't have, or some nag-run out na.
mm,
Others hanggang itong February na lang or itong March. So they're the ones that we have to watch out for,
mm.
because the mortality is already so high as it is, and we have to protect the ones that are still alive.
Okay. Sige, we'll continue this conversation. We just need to take a break. Please stay with us. We'll be back with Andy Masigan.
Sure.
Welcome back to the agenda. Ako po si Roby Alampay, sitting in for Cito Beltran. And we're still here with Andy Masigan. Andy, so we've been talking about, I have another guest coming in later, and I want you to join and let's have this fascinating conversation. But so I want to ask, so you opened a restaurant, you're still running your restaurant group. How's it going so far? And let me just throw it in there as well. Obviously, as you said, you had to pivot. No,
Mm.
you had to pivot a lot of things. You had to try out a lot of new things. What worked? What didn't work? What was the big takeaway during the time that you had to readjust?
Mm. Everyone, and not only myself, I think I speak for most enterprises out there who were affected by the pandemic. In other words, those involved in retail, those involved, basta anything consumer related, you were affected. Okay, and I think the biggest takeaway was we were all. It was really number one, pivot or die. Two, efficiency programs galore or die.
Mm,
What I mean to
mm,
say is we really had to dig into our cost accounts,
mm,
every single cost account, and where we can derive savings. We just have to slash that out, slash it out, slash it out, because the
mm.
name of the game was lowering your overhead with a lower revenue base. We needed to
Yeah.
slash our operating expenses. So
Mm,
whatever we could slash, tanggal yan. So in a way, Robbie, it became detrimental to the economy. Okay,
mm.
because first to go was
Yeah. Mm,
advertising and PR expense, so affected the
mm, mm,
advertising industry. Second to go
mm.
were not outlets that were not performing as well, or
Okay.
maybe okay. So those outlets closed them. So
Mm,
in the malls received the blowback for that. But I think the biggest blowback was having to reduce the number of people across the board. No, so in entrepreneurs organization, where like I mentioned earlier, it's not uncommon for those who had, let's say, 500 employees before to be down to about 100 plus or 200 at this point.
80%. That's 60% to 80%.
It's really massive. Rob. Talagang
Ah.
massive. Massive
Ah.
ang layoffs. So, see,
So it's a matter of, so are you all saying that, look, everybody had not only good ideas but the right ideas,
Mm.
but the other side to making these cuts, these really painful
Mm.
and cuts, was also to say that, look, you can have a strategy, pero kailangan mo rin pahabain yung PC mo, kailangan mo tipirin
Exactly.
yung you
Oo.
have to experiment in ways
Oo.
somehow.
It's really a long-term game, eh. And you have whatever
Mm.
cash you were left with March 2020. That's
Mm.
what you have to operate with. Kasi
Yeah, no,
the,
because people, di ba, we know the wisdom
mm,
of everyone, not just entrepreneurs and businessmen, di ba? Save some money for the rainy day. Um,
mm.
but
And the
what was
really
the rule of thumb before? Because this rainy day lasted
yeah.
for, it's been lasting 1.5 years already. But what was the rule of thumb? What did people have in their war chest that we realized, oh my God, this is only
Mm.
10% or X% of what we should be having.
Well, working capital is three months of operating expense. Okay,
Mm.
that was 3 months, so that would have been consumed by June or July. So
Mm.
for most corporations, they're either eating up on their retained earnings because
Mm.
the working capital is completely depleted. I can say that for sure.
Mm.
Others, siguro, through the savings of the owners,
Yeah.
you know. And if you don't have that resource, then you just have to call it quits.
Okay.
Mm-mm.
Okay. Andy, like I told you, I want to bring in another guest, another
Sure.
very good friend of one. Yung suking-suki to, practically co-host na namin sa Chiefs to. This is, let's bring in Dr. Guido David. Professor David, as our viewers now know, is with OCTA Research, and they have really been at the forefront, not just of feeding data, but really of the advocacy to have science, data, and evidence-based policy in our governance right now, particularly when it comes to COVID response. Guido, welcome to the Chiefs. And something I've never said to you in all the times that you've guested in the Chiefs. Good morning, Guido.
Yes. Yeah. Good morning, Robbie and Andy.
So I
Guido.
don't know. I don't know if I've ever done this. Alam mo naman sa Chiefs, di ba, parang we talk to economists one time and then public health, and it's a panel of a particular sector. But I wanted to bring you in together because you have a mathematician here in Guido. You have the entrepreneur and the economist in Andy, and I really thought this would be a fun conversation to have. But Guido, let's start with you. Okta has new information, new data, and certainly your own insights now as we enter MGCQ.
Well, like we said, our position is gradual relaxation, balancing it with public health risk, and we advised on the side of more on the public health aspect. We respect the decision of the mayors if it's the majority voting for going to MGCQ. We respect that, and we have to move forward, and we have to just make sure that we are careful and risk is averted or we prevent risks, especially now that we have the variant detected in Cebu, and this variant is of course worrisome. So basically that's
Oh, sige. Guido, one thing that I do know the mathematicians and economists share is you both stand on data. You both stand on numbers. Talk to us very quickly, but the both of you explain it to me not as if you're talking to an economist, but the fact that you're talking to a journalist. So I don't necessarily I'm not at that level when it comes to data. But how does B117 and the number or numbers that it represents, how does it change the modelings from the entire year preceding the emergence of B117?
Well, Robbie, what we saw in Cebu, and we also saw this mountain province regions up north, is that it can increase the reproduction number, yung infection rate by about zero point 0.5. And in fact, yan yung signature that we found sa mountain province and the Cordillera Administrative Region. When we first saw the numbers increasing there by that much, parang we thought this is not normal. Maybe this is attributed to something different. And true enough, we hypothesized that maybe it's due to the variant. And true enough, they found the variant in Mountain Province. And then we were seeing the same thing in Cebu. So right now, the important thing is, whatever our quarantine restriction is, we cannot let this variant spread out in Metro Manila, because it would be, our modeling shows that it would be disastrous for us. We could return to August levels in about 35 days if this variant takes hold in Metro Manila. And that's what we are just concerned about. So, I mean, we could open up business sectors as long as we're careful, relax economy, and as long as we take precautions. But we're really concerned about this variant that we found in Cebu, which has not yet been identified. But based on what we're seeing, it could be either the UK variant or even the South African variant, based on the mutations.
But Guido, when you say zero point 0.5, nadagdagan ng 0.5, let's put that into context, because we're starting from a base of 1, ideally
Yeah.
lower than 1. No? But take that away, what does that mean in terms of how much faster it will grow by whatever exponential factor? In real terms, Amy illustrated for us that if, for example, it took this long under the old
Right.
variant to grow from this to this, how much faster will it grow from this to this with B117 in there?
Yeah, so just to illustrate, based on our simulations, for example, ngayon sa Metro Manila, let's say we're averaging 400 cases per day, which has been consistent since about October. So hindi naman nag-increase. But if this variant takes hold, yung 400 cases per day in 36 days will become 2,400 cases per day. I mean, this is not an exaggeration. This is just
Wow.
based on that simulation. We assume that the reproduction number is the same as what we're seeing in Cebu. So Cebu, for example, they started with 10 cases per day in December, and then they had the holiday surge, and then now they're at 200 cases per day. So in roughly 2 months, a little less than 2 months, they increased by 20 times yung case nila. So that's the kind of simulation that we did. If the variant
Okay.
takes hold, yes.
Yeah, and I have to say, your simulations so far have been spot on. Otherwise, you wouldn't be the favorite guest on every network. And for that matter, government will not be telling you, "Oy, wag niyo ngang linalabas yan na mag-isa. Idadaan niyo muna sa amin kasi nagmumukha kaming huli sa balita dito." But Andy, I mean, how do you when you open the papers? Or when you open Philippine Star or Business World and sit down and you look at these numbers, how does a businessman take it and an economist? Because on the one hand, I imagine, parang there must be dread, and there must be dread in it, and there's the discipline in you that says no, we want evidence based policy, and so here's the evidence, here's the data. On the other hand, we've been spending a lot of time talking about and really framing how urgent this is on the livelihood side. So how do you take your morning coffee? How do you wake up to this kind of
scenarios? It's really, the name of the game. Let's talk about the entrepreneur side. As a businessman, the name of the game is business survival. So, at any news that can that indicates an opening up of the economy and increasing our customer base is always welcome. And you're right. That's where the tug of war is. Because on the other hand, we also realize, as a Filipino, that lives are at stake, and we can't take unnecessary risks. No. However, yun nga, if we don't get our revenues up for most businesses, especially those in retail, um,
Hmm.
we will just fall in the wayside one by one. No, how long will
Hmm.
this last? I think we're pretty much seeing the micro side of it obliterated or almost obliterated. So
Hmm.
natitira na lang are the ones in the medium, small, the upper scale of the small side, yung mga 10 million revenues a year and above are the only ones operating now. Those, small spa operators, small food cart operators, they're not operating anymore.
Hmm.
Mm.
Andy, it's do you think that it's enough that we can say na hindi, pwede pa rin naman mag-localized lockdown eh. Pwede, in fact, pwede pa naman mag-hyper lockdown. In other words, do the LGUs, you think, still have enough weapons in their arsenal to still somehow keep a lid on it, even as we take off that lid?
Well, we were banking on the contact tracing systems that were supposedly in place, because with the
Hmm.
contact tracing systems, then we could do a more localized and more um, laser focused lockdown,
Hmm.
which will not
Hmm.
detriment, which will not be a shotgun approach and closing down the economy. But
Hmm.
so far, we have not realized that kind of accuracy in as far as our contact tracing is concerned. That's why the risk is
Hmm.
still there, which is the difference between the Vietnam scenario, wherein
Yeah.
they started very early in their contact tracing. So,
So
so
yeah.
am I secure about our opening the economy? No, I'm not secure. But on the other hand, I'm also worried. So I can't
Hmm.
take one position.
Yeah, no, I mean, no,
Yeah.
of course, and to be fair, let me say this for everyone. Neither does Guido, neither does Octa, no. For them, but Guido, yung contact tracing, we were talking about, in fairness to government and all our leaders, everything has improved across the board, di ba? The prevention, the communication, although there still leaves much to be desired there. The behavior of people, contact tracing. We're hopefully getting the vaccines soon, but let's talk about contact tracing, because that is one of the things that OCTA has always advocated for. We need to at least get better at contact tracing as well. We need to get better at getting data. Doon sa contact tracing, once we enter MGCQ, does that make it harder? On the assumption that now I see people, traveling, crossing 3, 4 cities in Metro Manila to get to work. Everybody's crossing borders. I don't know necessarily what it means in terms of local tourism, particularly in traveling by cars to Tagaytay or neighboring provinces and so on. Has the contact tracing, and the premise is it has improved, but has it improved to the level that it can keep pace with MGCQ?
Well, the contact tracing has improved. As you know, Robbie, we work with the local government as far as pandemic modeling, and yung contact tracing has been scaled up in large part due to the assistance of the DILG. So they've provided additional contact tracing human resource to the local governments, and this has been really effective in the efforts of the local government. Kasi before, yung contact tracing ratio na nakikita namin sa local government was only 1:5. That means each suspect, they're able to trace about 5 people. But they went up as high as mga 1:20, I believe. So they were able to trace 20 contacts per suspect or per infected. And this is a huge difference, and no, it
Hmm.
made our efforts more effective. Of course, part of the reason why they were more effective was also because yung numbers natin have been stable. If numbers start to go up, it will be more
Hmm.
difficult to retain that ratio. Siyempre, more infected, more contacts
Hmm.
to be traced. And we will also,
Yeah, but is there a way to is there a way to profile, let's say, the 1 to 20? No, from the 1 to 5 to the 1 to 20. Um, who are they tracing and within what limited scope? So I imagine not everybody was going to work, di ba? So everybody's on lockdown. So kung sino man iti-trace mo na into 20, maybe bumisita ka minsan sa tatay at nanay mo, di ba? Maybe you had mga nag-deliver yung pinsan mo minsan
Right.
ng leche plan, di ba? And then it's easy to apportion to the 20 people to be traced there, di ba? But as soon as you go to work, what is the model? What is the assumption? How much more should be the minimum number of people that our capacity can take in terms of tracing?
Well, yung exact methods of their contact tracing, like who they contact, I mean, I'm not privy to, but what as far as we're concerned, they do contact trace all those, for example, it's the immediate household, neighboring communities, and work, and any of those that the person might list, as persons that they were in contact with. Um, but the limitations really the manpower kasi sometimes from what we know or what we heard from the local government, yung contact trace is it's not as easy as just calling a cell phone number. Sometimes they physically have to go to the barangay. Sometimes they have to go through esquinitas in dense communities just to do the contact tracing, and this takes a lot of man hours, resource hours, and
Yeah.
manpower. So that's part of the challenge. And of course, once we expand, once we move to MGCQ, it will really require the cooperation then of civil society, of the people. I mean, when people write their contact, their names in restaurants, for example, address and phone numbers. I mean,
Yeah.
those will be important moving forward.
Robbie,
Good that you mentioned that, because I was going to swing to you, Andy, di ba? Because
yeah, yeah,
on
no,
the
I will-
opposite extreme of the esquinitas, di ba? Technology has really been a major weapon here. Andy, you're a restaurateur. Every time we go to a restaurant, which is not often, but every time we go to an establishment, a mall, you go out, they ask you to sign. Ngayon, yung may mga QR code, they tell you to scan the QR code. Andy, does that work? I mean, have you had the occasion to have the proof of concept of how powerful that is?
You know what? I really wanted to react to what Guido was saying earlier, no, about having the manpower and the bandwidth to be able to effectively undertake contact tracing. We have to look. Metro Manila is a 20 million has a 20 million population. You can't do effective contact tracing even if you had 50,000 people doing. You have to be technology assisted. I was studying the model in Spain. As you know, Rob, my daughter studies in Spain, diba? So, and we've been visiting, and we visited last year to see if she was all right. But nevertheless, my point is, you can never do effective contact tracing if it's not technology assisted. And I have to say, though, that that's where the national ID system comes in. Because Madrid, for instance, QR code, swipe, any establishment, they know exactly where you live, they know where you are, they know it's, like I said, technology assisted. The whole plethora of data is there. There's no need for going through escanitas and tracking because everyone naman has a cell phone. Ganyan, it's like that in, at least in Madrid, where when we visited. And I found I have my office kasi is in Ortigas. Pasig has adopted the same technology assistant method. And I think it's been very effective. But then, if Pasig does it alone, but Pasay does not, and Parañaque does not, they cancel each other out. Kailangan holistic, di ba? The entire Metro Manila or Metro Manila Calabarzon, ganon. And I just think it's an impossible task to do it manually. If not impossible, highly inefficient. And I think
Yeah,
the benefit.
but Andy, we've been talking about a national ID long before COVID. I mean, we were talking about, I mean,
Alam mo,
for decades, even prior to
well,
now. Now, Quezon City,
I
there
don't
are
know.
LGUs now that are launching their own IDs, di ba? They're not, Quezon City is launching its own EID, not waiting for the national ID. They say when the national ID is ready, the data here will also sync with the national ID, and so on. I agree. But I'm just wondering, therefore, but what are we saying? Are we saying wait for the national ID? Because
No.
it's not coming soon, and even when it rolls out, it starts off very slowly being rolled out to the lower
My point
demographics,
is,
di ba?
how has Pasig, and to a lesser degree City of Manila, how have they been able to pull it off in
Hmm.
2 months, 3 months? They,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
it's the software is available, the
yeah,
technology is available. It's a matter of rolling it out. Of course,
yeah, yeah,
there's a question of
yeah.
funding. Some LGUs can't afford. Pero the point is, it's readily accessible. And
Yeah, no, I agree. And when you say technology, I want to validate also this with Guido. That's a fair premise, no, Guido? Would you say that when you say technology, let's start with the base of the mobile phone, not just the mobile phone, but the smartphone, not just the smartphone, but even reasonable access to data, to use your smartphone, to enroll yourself in some electronic platform, to bring out. That's a safe premise. Would you say?
Yes, I agree, Robbie. In fact, even in our reports, we have been advocating for smart apps or tracing apps since early on because we know how difficult it is. We agree with Andy. It's very difficult to do manual contact tracing, and it requires a national ID or some kind of ID. And in fact, one of our colleagues, the Father Nicanor, when he was leaving for the U.S. He went through the airport. Sabi niya, he had to scan different QR codes because there were different, I think QR codes or apps for each LGU. So there's like a coordination problem. I mean, this is really, our target, our ideal to have this contact tracing app and maybe a national ID. But there's also aside from the technology base, there's also a cultural problem that we think there. I mean, we haven't done a survey regarding this, but a cultural problem wherein Filipinos are generally, I don't know, hesitant to have this kind of application. I think they even mentioned issues about data privacy early on. I'm not sure if it's
Yeah.
a valid issue, but this was one of the issues mentioned aside from the technology and the having access to data.
And speaking of cultural, or let's say at the very least behavioral, ang OCTA has really good insights, Andy, on, they did a survey on what do people say they do in compliance with best practices. And on top of that, they validated what do Filipinos actually do. You might be interested in that. We need to take a break. I'll bring back Guido with that perspective when we come back. Please stay with us. I'm Roby Alampay, sitting in for City Balkan. We're still on the agenda. Welcome back to Agenda. Ako po si Roby Alampay, sitting in for Cito Beltran. And we are still with businessman and economist, columnist of Philippine Star and BusinessWorld, Andrew Masigan, and Dr. Guido David of OCTA Research. And Guido, I wanted to prompt this because it's fascinating insights, surveys done by, you had your baseline data a couple of months back. Now I know you're getting ready to have some comparative data on that. But the key insight is basically, tama ba na Filipinos say one thing and they do another?
Well, yeah, but yeah, we compared our survey results based on surveys we did, manually. What I meant is we conducted a survey of 600 NCR residents on how well they comply with the wearing of face masks, for example, and what we got was about a 90 to 93% compliance with an error of about 4%. So that's pretty high. But at the same time, we also did actually, initially, one of our colleagues, the Father Nicanor, again, he worked with Vic Paterno of the 7-Eleven, and they looked at CCTV data from 7-Eleven, and I think what they got was about 75 to 80% face mask compliance. And then we also conducted a local government survey, taking pictures, so not asking questions, but taking pictures of people in communities. And the average face mask compliance was, I think, also about 80%. I don't have the exact numbers, but the variance or the range was in some barangays they had about 98% mask compliance, and then in some barangays, they had about 20% mass compliance. So that is a huge range. Now, as a numbers person, I would of course always be careful about making comparisons because I'm not sure if we can make a direct comparison because they were conducted at different times. The written survey was conducted in December. The mass surveys were done, I think, around August or September or to October. So the time frames could be different. So it may not be a clear comparison, but at the same time, it's still interesting to know that there's a discrepancy. So of course, one
Ah,
explanation could be that they improved their mask wearing later on during the timeline. But
yeah.
yeah, we have to take everything into context, and we just present the numbers, and it's for people to decide. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, notwithstanding my framing of it, I mean, that's not bad. I mean, that's a 10 point, 20 point difference starting from a high base of 90s. So
Yeah.
we're down to 70. That's still a majority of people, absolutely a majority of people having the right behavior when it comes to masks. But Andy, how do you see this playing out in your establishments and in the private sector, malls especially? Are you observing the same things, or are you more encouraged by now seeing na okay, looks like we got this behavior down?
Actually, quite. I think I did mention earlier that visited my daughter in Europe now last year, and
Hmm.
I have to say that I've been quite impressed by the Filipinos and how we've adapted to the rules. I mean, I've seen it in my restaurants. No, they and it's not that we enforce it, but the customers themselves insist on distancing themselves to each other and across tables.
Hmm.
They wear their mask and their shields unless actually eating. A lot of them prefer either the private room or the alfresco dining for obvious reasons. And
Hmm.
that's why if you have alfresco, advantage yan sa'yo kasi
Hmm.
people prefer that area. So I've been very, very impressed with the way the Filipinos have complied with the restrictions. Not so true in Europe, which is
Hmm.
why they got the second wave and they got it bad. No?
Hmm.
Uh,
Hmm.
so, I remember pa nga, I was really very paranoid. We were in Pamplona at that time, and people were going to tapas bars and as if there was nothing because their numbers were down. And it just
Mm.
goes to you really can't, you can relax, but always regulated, always
Yeah.
regulated. Mm. So
But Andy, we've had a few of these already, a few rounds of it. Now that we're entering MGCQ and you have more businesses, you're encouraging more businesses to reopen, and certainly a lot are raring to go and to try out their pivots, to try out their new strategies. They're leaner.
mm,
I've disciplined myself. I'm leaner. We had to make some painful decisions. Now we're ready, and now we're starting to open the gate. Can you take a false start? Can our entrepreneurs and businessmen take a false start, assuming that we reopen and then, here are the numbers that we dread. We're gonna have to shut down again. We're gonna have to go back to GCQ again.
I think uh, I think if opening the economy may save certain businesses. In other
Mm,
words, if, for instance, we're able to relax, the biggest factor I think I mentioned earlier, Rob, was the 18 years old and lower. No,
mm,
they comprise kasi a large chunk of our retail consumers. So if we're able to open them, some business will be able to extend their runway, shall we say, uh,
mm,
and and prolong their business life.
mm,
So can we take a backlash or the blowback of that? But that's
mm,
always been hanging over our heads, no? So
mm,
any opportunity to generate more revenue, we'll take it.
Okay, okay.
Yeah.
Now, I want to get into again, still the MGCQ, entering MGCQ, as we mentioned, very close vote. We don't know exactly the breakdown, but we know the vote was along the lines of nine approving and backing this recommendation to reopen. So we're talking about Metro Manila, eight voting against it. uh, Andy, as an economist, as somebody that looks at policy as well, why not just let LGUs still have that authority and that mandate to decide for their LGU, or does it frankly just make more sense na either we're all in or we're all out? What's the balance for LGUs here?
Well, when you talk about LGUs in a Metro Manila context, actually, you really have to talk about Metro Manila as one unit, considering that alone we comprise 32% or more, no? Probably nowadays, probably close to 40% of the country's GDP, and there's practically no border control between Quezon City and Pasig and
Mm,
Novaliches, etc. Novaliches, not sorry, not Novaliches, but Marikina, etc. No, um, so we have to look at Metro Manila as one unit, uh,
mm,
and also because it's the economic engine of the country. No,
mm,
so let me put my economics hat at this point. No, I
mm,
think we really need this, Robbie, because although we have the base effect working to our advantage for this year's GDP growth,
mm,
productivity is still low. Productivity is still low, and our ability to recover is directly linked to the opening of the economy, which in turn is directly linked to the vaccination program. Okay,
okay.
and we know that the vaccination program, although I wrote about it 2 days ago, the government's plan is very, very good, huh? So by the third quarter, we should achieve, by the end of the third quarter, we should achieve herd immunity, wherein 60% of the population would have been vaccinated.
Mm,
And the systems are there, and I validated the logistics chain. A lot of it, Robbie, is jobbed out to third party contractors, no, like Royal
mm.
Cargo and what you
Yeah,
call
yeah.
Wheeling.
I see what you're saying, Andy. But not to be cynical about it, although that is me. Uh, herd a lot. So much hinges on herd immunity and the timeline that, maybe by the third quarter if we're at this point. But look, government as early as 2 weeks ago said, we can expect the first batch last week, and now they
Exactly my
literally
point.
don't know. Diba? So
Exactly.
what will throw a spanner here? What will make you say, "Oh my God, I have no answer for that"?
You
If
know what?
let's say in the
Hmm.
third quarter we do not even see these indicators for the vaccination program, what will make
Yeah.
even the businessmen throw their hand up in the air and say that, "Look, wait, no, we have to do the
Yeah.
right thing here. We have to admit this is
Well,
not going the way we said it should."
you know what? The plan is there, and I have to admit, the messaging for the plan was a mess. I
Mhm.
literally had to piece the vaccinate national vaccination plan together. Having said that, the plan exists, and the plan, in my opinion, is sound, although a little bit ambitious. Because the whole idea, nga, as I mentioned, is third quarter, end of third quarter herd immunity. The stumbling
Mhm.
block here, Rob, is supply. It
Mhm.
assumes
Mhm.
that the because we signed 5 letters of engagement already from the 7 vaccine,
Mm, mm,
di ba?
mm,
And when you sign the letter, the engagement letter, you're theoretically assured of supply. Okay, but
mm,
if there's
mm,
really no supply, then that
mm.
paper doesn't mean squat. Okay,
Yeah.
and that's the
Okay.
situation we're facing now. Although may
Okay. Now,
document, although may
mm.
document, walang supply. What can you do?
Yeah,
Mhm.
I want to bring back Guido about that point about, look, Metro Manila is one unit, but I still want to focus on that vote, the 9-8 vote. I have some idea on some of the LGUs. Marcy Chodorov, Marikina, Toby Chanko, they've always been on record that if it were up to us, we would prefer not to reopen still. But obviously, each LGU, when they take into account their population, the size, their infrastructure, the number of hospitals they have, their health workers, and of course their caseload in their respective LGUs. That's what factors into the 9-8 vote. But so I ask you, Guido, everybody in the Metro Manila Council has one vote per LGU. But when you start talking about a metro-wide or a nationwide policy, should everybody's vote be weighted the same?
Yes, Robbie, that's an interesting discussion, and in a perfect world, we would have something similar to what the U.S. has in Electoral College, yeah, in which states are weighted according to their population, and the vote of the mayors would be weighted towards how much of the NCR they comprise. So, for example, Quezon City has maybe 20%. Does that mean si Joy Belmonte will get 20% of the votes? Of course, that's a perfect world, but siguro in practice, it's challenging, and to implement that or for them to agree on that. And I think it's more of ano na lang naman. It's like a consensus between the mayor. So it's not. I mean, it's not about
Yeah.
who has more responsibility. I mean, I think they themselves agreed that they will move as one unit, just like Andy mentioned. So it's more of a like parang pakikisama na lang. They will move as one unit, and well, each they decided that each vote counts as just one, and
Mm.
and I think it's a close decision, but if we're going with majority rules, then it's a democracy. So uh, the side of towards opening up wants, so we respect that.
Okay. So, but yeah, but now moving forward, you are still going to monitor. We don't have a lot of time left. But to Guido and then to Andy, what are you eager to see? As we let's assume that as they said, let's start in March. Let's reopen in March. What would you be eager or anxious to see? Let's say by the end of April.
Well, if we're starting with me, well, of course, eager would not be the word. We're generally a bit pessimistic, and especially my colleagues, the Professor Ranjit, is very, very pessimistic.
Mm.
Of course, our best case scenario would be we will hold at this level, and that's what we're hoping to see, that there won't be any substantial increase, and if there would be an
Mm.
increase, it would be slight, and that we could manage it. Our healthcare would manage it. I mean, that's the best case scenario, because we've been trying to balance economy and public health since October. We've been gradually opening up, and we're not against opening up. We're not against certain business sectors. We're not against restaurants opening up. We're just trying to balance it with public health. And the important thing is that the messaging is still there. We don't want the public to have the complacency or to feel a sense of security that everything is back to normal. And I think that's the most important takeaway in this. I mean, MGCQ, GCQ, it's really just a terminology. What really matters, what the implementations are. But the most important part is how the public will perceive it and how we deliver that messaging to the public. That the threat is still there. We will still be careful. We're going to try and open up the economies, but still be careful.
Guido, very quickly before I let Angie have the final word, how different is this from, we sort of had, would you say, a dry run on a looser regime when we entered Christmas season? I know we were all bracing for, what might this mean? All of these, not just Christmas season, but entering January with these big religious festivals and so on. And yet, there was that surge, but it didn't necessarily translate to the worst of our nightmares. Try to contextualize what might happen with what we did see in December and January.
Well, of course, if we weren't able to mitigate it, Robbie, we would have a surge similar to Cebu. But maybe we loosened restrictions, but at the same time, we were I would say we were effective in the messaging. I mean, not just the media, but also the national and local governments, the Department of Health, even the different departments of government, and the messaging was able to help bring it to the people, communicate to the people that this is what we needed to do to prevent the surge. Okay, and right now, so we will get more freedom. People will have more freedom to go out, but it's not just a privilege. It also carries responsibility for the people, and that's what we must remind people that. Yeah, we're getting more freedom, but we also have more responsibility now, more personal responsibility now that we're able to go out more.
Okay, Andy.
If the question is what would I like to see in the next few months?
Yeah.
Me, I'd go for the bang for the buck that would benefit both the private sector and the economy as a whole. Now, what would benefit the private sector? We are a consumer-led economy, open for 18 years old and below. Okay, they're a low risk sector in the first place, and this would give the retail and MSME sector the shot in the arm that it needs. Immediate yan. Okay, back for the buck. For the economy as a whole, this will medyo Robbie, medyo left field ito. Pero what we're looking for here is how can we raise productivity? How can we raise revenue? We need to find that. And there's a low-hanging fruit. And this is opening up Executive Order 12 of the mining industry. There are 26 mining projects ready to roll out if that executive order is lifted. Okay, and we will reap the benefits of that as early as the third quarter. And we're talking here of unemployment of something like 250,000 people out of this 26. So, sa akin, bang for the buck, what we can do now, to save the economy and save MSMEs is what we're looking for.
Okay, Andy and Guido will have to take this conversation to the chiefs in our next episode. Typical of our guests, which is why we love them. They keep dropping all of these things that we know constitute more conversations that we'll have to continue. Evening naman. But thank you, Andy. Thank you, Guido. I have no doubt Cito would have wanted to sit in here as well to converse with both of you. Maraming salamat for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Okay. And that's it for today's agenda. On behalf of Cito Beltran, ako po si Roby Alampay. Maraming salamat po. We are One News.